Hello, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to this SICC Distinguished Speaker Series event. As you know, the Distinguished Speaker Series is our flagship event series. It has been for decades, it will continue to be, and it's an opportunity that we enable for you, our members and friends, to engage with distinguished speakers from the world of business, politics, intellectual pursuits, academia, and public personalities. I'm particularly happy to welcome our distinguished speaker for this morning, Mr. Png Cheong Boon, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Enterprise Singapore. Cheong Boon was one of the first senior civil servants I met when I joined the Chamber nearly 8 years ago, and I've always been struck by his candor, his warmth, and his knowledge of what really happens on the ground in the business community. This morning, I also want to do one thing, which is to thank Enterprise Singapore for its continued support. Ever since we launched our SICC Awards for Collaborative Innovation back in 2015. Then, of course, Enterprise Singapore was in its previous incarnation, Spring Singapore. And I want to thank you, Cheong Boon, and your former and current colleagues for all the support over the years. Ladies and gentlemen, since I have the advantage of a captive audience, I want to do a shout out for the awards. This year's awards nomination will close on the 24th of May, so it's literally only a few weeks away. So if you or your friends and business associates know of successful collaborations, do consider nominating them or yourselves for an award. It couldn't be easier. The details are on the screen in front of you. There is a dedicated microsite which gives you the nomination form as well as an information pack about the 4 award categories. So moving back to this morning's proceedings, I will hand over in a short while to our chairman, Per Magnuson, who is the moderator for today's session. Per will introduce our distinguished speaker properly, and then we will start the webinar proper. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your company. If you have questions at any time during the webinar, feel free to type them in the Q&A box, which you'll find in the toolbar at the bottom of your screens. Thank you. Enjoy the webinar. Per, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Victor. Let me also join in and warmly welcome our speaker today, Mr. Png Cheong Boon. Thank you for being with us today. But before inviting Mr. Png to address us, please allow me to also introduce our audience today in the Chamber. And the Singapore International Chamber of Commerce has been helping businesses in Singapore since 1837, almost 200 years. And this has been achieved not just by the Chamber itself, but more importantly by all its member companies and all their contributions to the economy and to the community. SICC is an inclusive and independent chamber, and we don't limit ourselves to any country or ethnical representation. We use our independence to advocate for business and for Singapore to help sustain the economy of this special country and to help our members to thrive here. Our guest of honor today is no one less than the CEO of Enterprise Singapore, Mr. Png Cheong Boon. And Cheong Boon has been the CEO of ESG since it was formed about 3 years ago when merging International Enterprise Singapore and Spring Singapore. Mr. Png is a graduate from Raffles Junior College, Cornell University, as well as Stanford University. And before assuming his current role, he already had a very distinguished career and is currently, in addition to being the CEO of ESG, also a board member of several organizations, which includes EDB and SG Innovate. And these boards, as well as Enterprise Singapore, are vital institutions to the chamber, and they touch all our member companies in one way or the other. And we really appreciate the support that we've gotten all these years. I'm therefore confident that we will have a very interesting time together today. And let me end here and instead warmly welcome Mr. Png to deliver his address. So Cheong Boon, please, over to you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Per. Good morning to you, and also good morning to Mr. Victor Mills, CEO of SICC, as well as to all of the members who have taken time to dial in for this particular webinar. First and foremost, I think it is very honored to be invited to join you as a speaker in your distinguished speaker series. For today, I think what I will do for the next 10-15 minutes is just to share with you briefly what Enterprise Singapore does, what we had done last year in the midst of the whole COVID pandemic, and also what we want to do moving forward in terms of helping our businesses to recover from the pandemic, COVID pandemic. And maybe we leave a lot more time for Q&A, which I think is usually the more interesting part of any webinars. Well, first and foremost, I think as far as Enterprise Singapore is concerned, we were formed as what Victor mentioned just now. We were formed through the merger of two government agencies, i.e. Singapore as well as Spring Singapore in April 2018. The intention of this merger was to provide a single port of call, a single agency that can help our SMEs from startup of formation to grow into international companies, a single agency that can help them in their formation, in their upgrading, and in helping them to expand into global markets. Versus in the past where we have two agencies and therefore enterprises have to call on two different agencies to support them. So that's really the intention. And at the same time, despite that main focus on enterprise development and internationalization, we continue to hold on to several other national roles. One, of course, is the agency responsible for promotion of trade and promoting Singapore as a global trading hub. Second is also national authority in the area of standardization, in the area of accreditation or conformity assessment. And third, we are also a regulator for consumer product safety, as well as for weights and measure in Singapore. So we actually at Enterprise Singapore plays multiple roles, all of which are necessary in particularly in a nation's economic development. In other countries who are much bigger, all this will be handled by 4 different agencies. But in Singapore, because we want to derive some economies of scale, and that's why we merge into a single agency. That also means that there's a lot of synergy that we can derive by having all these functions under one roof. Because when it comes to promotion of trade, at the end of the day, it's really to help Singapore industries and Singapore companies internationalize. So there's a synergy within that as well. Similarly, in the area of standardization, it is not just about developing standards and aligning standards to international standards, but it's also how do we use standards as a way to help Singapore companies internationalize and support the global markets. So putting all this under Enterprise Singapore actually help us to do our work in each of these areas more effectively. But that said, that means having an agency that has multiple mandates rather than a single mandate. Now, let me talk about what we did last year. Last year, I think it's an understatement to say that it is an unprecedented year with tremendous challenges for all companies and every single individuals. For SMEs, it's even more challenging because of the nature of their size and the nature of their business. And therefore, at the onset of the COVID crisis, really one of our key focus was to help enterprises deal with the crisis, understanding how the COVID pandemic will hit them, what do they need to do, and also to help them to sustain their business as much as possible so that they can in turn retain jobs. So really that was one of our key focus last year, to help companies deal with the crisis, sustain their business so that they can retain jobs, and thereby ensuring that the unemployment doesn't go out of hand. So to do so, we did a few areas. We launched the temporary bridging loan program. We also increased the support for the various SME loan programs. And last year, I think you may have read in the media, we lent out about $18 billion worth of loans to 21,000 companies. That is more than 12 times the normal year. At the same time, as we went into circuit breaker and businesses have to operate from home, we realized that many of the SMEs were not as well equipped in digital solutions that allow them to do so. So we step up the support through the Productivity Solutions Grant by offering more solutions that will enable remote working, enable e-commerce. So last year, again, more than 23,000 companies tap on these various COVID-related kind of digital solutions so that they can continue to operate regardless of whether they are allowed to go back to the office or not. We also we also took the opportunity to accelerate our earlier push on e-commerce when customers are not allowed to dine in, when malls were not allowed to open during the circuit breaker. We step up our e-commerce as well as food delivery booster packages to help more retailers go online and to help more restaurants provide takeout services. And all in all, I think we were quite happy to be able to onboard another 3,000 plus retailers onto the e-commerce platform. And we also managed to onboard more than 19,000 F&B establishments onto the various food delivery platform. So even after we have exited from the circuit breaker, many of these players found that their e-commerce revenue continued to be a significant proportion of their overall revenue, particularly for restaurants, because with safe management measures in place, the capacity for dining in will have been reduced. So the food delivery revenue will continue to be a sizable portion of their overall business in order to sustain their business moving forward. So this is really what we did last year. As you know, in addition, we also did quite a few things, whether it is manning the COVID business hotline to advise companies on what to do and what not to do, whether it's about deploying safe distancing ambassador, those in red shirts in the malls, to help to enforce or help to make sure that both the tenants as well as the customers adhere to safe distancing measure. And today we have more than 800 of our safe distancing ambassadors deployed across the whole island in 100 malls. And this is part of the overall public service effort to enforce safe distancing measures with national parks, with NEA and other agencies taking care of different parts of the public places. Additionally, we also work with Ministry of Law to roll out various COVID temporary relief measures, be it debt moratorium, be it the relief alignment framework. We talk about contract renegotiation, and in the early days, it was also about rental relief. And most recently, I think you probably have read about the new the Code of Conduct for Fair Tenancy Agreement that we have worked jointly with SBF as well as the various industry bodies on that. So quite a few things that we were involved in last year simply to help all our SMEs enterprises overcome the COVID pandemic and ride through it. So at the end of last year, we were quite heartened to see that at least the business insolvency, the number of firms that went bankrupt were kept to a manageable level, and unemployment did not shoot up significantly. So really it's still about sustaining business and retaining jobs, hoping to keep them alive such that when the economy recovers, more and more of them can continue to operate rather than close shop prematurely. But in addition to the crisis efforts, we were also very glad to see that many enterprises continue with their transformation and upgrading. And maybe some of them wanted to do so because they recognize that, well, when the business volume is down, they now have the time and resources to focus on training and upgrading. Likewise, I think quite a few of them told us that should the economy recover, the competition will be a lot more intense. And because the demand is lower, but the supply is higher, and therefore they need to come out much better, come out charging and more competitive vis-a-vis their competitors. And that's why we also saw quite a few SMEs continuing, in fact, stepping up their upgrading efforts. So last year, we supported more than 15,000 Singapore companies in their upgrading, in their innovation, in their internationalization effort. And this is actually more than 50% or higher than the year before. The majority of the increase come in the form of business transformation and innovation. Internationalization surprisingly didn't come to a halt. There are companies who are still trying to internationalize and seek business opportunities overseas, but we have to move away from physical meetings, business mission to virtual ones, and that has allowed us to continue with some of these efforts. Our scale-up companies continue their business transformation journey relatively uninterrupted. Our partners, McKinsey, PwC, continue to work with these companies in their business transformation. And in addition, we launched the third run of our scale-up with Ernst & Young and Stanford Business School as our partner. So now today we have 3 runs or 3 cohort of scale-up going through their business transformation. But scale-up has been designed to focus on those players who are much bigger, who are already regional players, and we want them to grow them into much bigger global players. Last year, we also tried to expand our reach to help the smaller companies that have the ambition. So we launched the Enterprise Leadership for Transformation program with our local biz school, just to help develop many of these smaller companies that have the ambition and the aspiration to develop them into bigger and stronger local and regional players. So some of the companies that, an example of the companies that we have supported through this program is Viki, and they work with Ernst & Young as part of the third run of the Scale Up program to develop new businesses together. Now, what is surprising last year was that the whole innovation and startup ecosystem was very resilient and actually a lot more vibrant. We would have thought that the startup activities will have scaled down and be a lot more muted, but actually it was the contrary. You probably read in the media reports recently, last year Singapore remains the leading venture capital investment location in Southeast Asia, with more than $5.5 billion of investment made into 550 deals. And many of this, more than 60% were in early stage company. So the whole startup environment remains very active. The VC remains very active in looking for investment, not just in Southeast Asia, but also specifically in Singapore startups. So that bodes quite well for our startup community. We also managed to jointly organize with MAS, the Singapore FinTech Festival, and Switch. But last year, we decided to adopt a hybrid approach. It's not possible to have a physical event only. So we did a 1 week long, around the clock hybrid event for Singapore FinTech Festival and Switch. And because of that, we saw a very good participation rate from more than 160 companies. Within that event, we had our global startup competition, Slingshot. And again, last year, we attracted a record number of applications, more than 7,500 applications from 150 countries. And this is twice the number of applications that we compared to 2019. So we were very surprised by the high level of interest from the startup community globally. And that means that actually demonstrate that as far as entrepreneurs and startups are concerned, COVID or not, whether there's restriction in travel or not, life goes on. In fact, they thrive they thrive on limited resources, and they thrive on based on technology to reach out to the global community. So I think that that demonstrates the health and the vibrancy of the startup community. Last year, we also expanded our Global Innovation Alliance network to 15 cities in 11 countries. And over the next few years, we plan to expand this to more than 25 cities. We are quite happy to share that more than 700 startups have actually tapped on these GIA networks and its programs. And this didn't stop last year as well. More importantly, we were very glad to see a much higher level of activities in the area of open innovation or co-innovation, or in SICC's word, collaborative innovation. And this is done between government agencies and major companies like multinationals and the large local companies on one hand, as well as with SMEs and startups on the other hand. So last year, together with different agencies and the larger companies, we jointly launched 15 innovation calls, and together they post about more than 100 challenge statements. These are problem statements looking for solutions that can help solve them. And we open up this innovation calls to the whole business community. And through these 15 innovation calls, we received more than 15,000 proposals of possible solutions that could be developed or co-developed to solve all these 115 challenge statements. And a significant number of this proposal came from SMEs and startups, both local as well as foreign. And this bodes well for the kind of collaborative innovation that we would like to see and that SICC would like to foster among the business community in Singapore. At the Switch event last year, we also launched the first Southeast Asia Open Innovation Challenge, where we invited 5 conglomerates in the region to come to Singapore to launch their open innovation call. And again, this allows us to create and make available opportunities for the SMEs and startups who are located in Singapore to serve the growing markets in the region. But it also allow the regional conglomerates to tap onto the innovation capacity that is present in Singapore. So again, this is a good start, and we hope to be able to do more moving forward. Some of the SICC members were involved in this. I think EM Services participated in the Sustainability Open Innovation Challenge and were involved in a couple of challenge statements. And the other one is Infineon. I think Infineon has also partnered with us to launch the first ever co-innovation startup space. And they have been working with several startups, one of which is Empotech, in their Open Innovation Challenge. So we were very happy to see a lot more of these partnerships that arises that were initiated last year. I think all this development in the startups and innovation space does demonstrate that Singapore is well positioned as a global hub for technology, innovation, and enterprise. And what's more heartening is really that all this takes place despite the fact that the whole global economy and just about every single business was affected by the COVID pandemic. Now, what is also very gratifying was that we saw how the business community has come together last year. The Open Innovation Co-Innovation Initiative is one good example. Companies start to realize that they can't, no matter how big they are, they can't operate in silos. They have to partner, and there are good ideas outside. The question is how to leverage on that. We also saw the trade associations and chambers stepping up significantly to help their industries, be it members or non-members. And it could be as simple as having a lot more regular webinars and video calls just to update their members on the latest development with respect to COVID. I think some TACs told us that they were meeting their members almost every day. And it also includes TACs then subsequently step up to bring their members together and see, well, which members need help and which member can provide the help, so that as a community, they help each other and they to ride out the crisis. And certainly, we also saw some TACs coming together to launch new initiative, not just to help the members who are in need, but also to continue to drive upgrading and transformation for the industry. So this community coming together was quite unprecedented last year, and we were very happy to see that happen. Now for 2021 and for this year, really our priorities is to help all our enterprises emerge stronger and then rush to sprint out of the gate. We will continue to press on with enterprise upgrading and transformation. I think that's important. The upgrading and transformation journey is not a one-off, and it's not a single year initiative. We need to institutionalize it, and we will want to press on with it. More importantly is because, as you know, the post-COVID world will not be the same. It will be a lot more volatile. There will be a lot more and more frequent disruption, whether is it on people movement, whether is it on trade flows, and who knows what will come up next. As I mentioned before, it will also be a lot more competitive because now you have at least the same amount of capacity, but facing a lower level of demand globally. So how do you then get your fair share? So every single industry will be a lot more competitive. And therefore, our companies in Singapore will have to learn how to deal with this, to deal with more disruptions, to deal with supply chain disruption, the people disruption, to deal with frequent changes, to deal with much higher level of competition. And our companies will then have to be prepared and to prepare themselves for that. So productivity improvements, automations, innovations, and transforming their current business model will remain very important moving forward. More importantly, is also for our enterprises to start looking for new demands and new markets. Without new demands, without new markets, their business will stagnate. So that includes looking for new opportunities in growth areas or opportunities in markets that have emerged stronger or are more ready to open up. And we will have to try to see how to do so virtually as well if travel remains restricted. Particularly, we are seeing emerging opportunities in markets like China, markets like Southeast Asia. I think the consumer markets remain quite vibrant. We are also seeing interest in manufacturing, particularly in Southeast Asia, or using Southeast Asia as a manufacturing hub and Singapore as the control tower for manufacturing. And we are also seeing opportunities in agri-tech, in sustainability. So we will be looking at new initiatives as well as pushing our companies to seize opportunities in this area. We will also want to write on what we have done or what the community has done last year to drive greater collaborations and partnerships among the businesses so that they can then work together, leverage on their combined resources and industry expertise to achieve a win-win outcome. As I said, we have seen good examples from multinationals and large local companies. We have seen many of these partnerships taking place last year. We have also seen many TACs stepping up to do their part and to do a lot more. We believe more of this can be done, and we certainly want to encourage more companies to come forward. So we certainly welcome SICC member to step forward, to work with us, to work with EDB, to see how can we bring the whole business community forward post-COVID. So with that, I thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be happy to move to the Q&A session. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Cheong Boon. That was very, very interesting. And I think your address there clearly highlighted how many areas ESG is covering, and actually also how it's touching all of our companies in our everyday life. It's quite impressive, actually. And I think it's also clear from your speech that the last year has not been like anything else before. You mentioned all these things that you've been doing in addition to what you were already doing before. And all of us in the industry and in the international community, as well as in the local community, are have experienced that, both what you in ESG has been doing and what the government has been doing, and the support has been quite extraordinary, actually. I think we're very fortunate to operate businesses here, to have such a responsive government where ESG is such a core part of. So thank you very much for that, actually. And to everyone listening, I think you probably have quite a few questions, and you're very welcome to key them in the Q&A tool, and I'll do my best to try to represent them in the best way. So thank you very much for that. And while you do that, let me take the opportunity to kick off with a few questions. And you have actually been leading ESG since it was formed, and you came from one of the other organizations previously as well. So what do you see as the key changes in terms of structure or focus area since ESG was established 3 years ago compared to the former IE Singapore and Spring?
Well, thanks, Pierre. I think the key change when we bring both together under one roof is a single focus and a more coordinated approach towards helping enterprises involved in terms of their upgrading and innovation, as well as going overseas. Previously, when we operate with two agencies, the two agencies need not necessarily align their business. So when we look at developing a new product, well, Spring could be helping the companies develop new product, but is the product then suitable for an overseas market? Now putting all under one roof, we will be able to look at it from the global market perspective and see what is it that the customer needs globally, not just within Singapore, and therefore, and who are their competitors overseas, so that when it comes to whether it's innovation, whether it's business model, whether it is capability upgrading, it is all done with a larger context in mind. I think that is a critical focus. Of course, to the companies, having to work with a single agency is a lot more effective, a lot more efficient than having to talk to both two different agencies who may have different processes, different approaches, and therefore make it more complicated and more inefficient for companies to deal with. So this is really the key area. Now, the second main difference is really that as a single agency, we can then now focus on what are the sectors we want to look at, what are the different segments, enterprise segments within the sectors, and how can we then serve them in a more effective manner. Whereas in the past, we may also have to spend some time trying to coordinate our efforts with other agencies. So that overall efficiency perspective is also very important from ESG part of ours. Of course, at the end of the day, we are overall responsible, so we can't run away from it. And that helps a lot for not just the enterprises, but also our key partners and also our trade associations.
Right. Yeah. And here in the industry, among the businesses, we can clearly feel the support. So I'm sure that it's working very well. And but that's anecdotal stories and anecdotal evidence. So how do you yourself measure that success? That actually what you're doing is actually giving the results you want. What are your key KPIs, or how do you actually do that?
Well, I will say that I personally measure success in a few ways. Certainly, the first and foremost will be the number of enterprises that we are able to assist on a day-to-day basis. How well are we able to assist them? Are we taking a long time, or are we being ineffective? That's more immediate kind of measurements, but that doesn't tell us the full picture. The second way we measure our success is really whether does it actually translate to actual outcomes in terms of GDP growth, outcomes in terms of the enterprise's contribution to GDP, outcomes in terms of better paying jobs and higher value added, or more productivity in the workers that's being employed. So that's more an outcome that we want to measure ourselves, but that takes a longer time to gestate. So, but it ensures that whatever we do on the annual basis eventually must lead to the actual economic outcomes. But the third way we measure our success, and this is internally, is actually at the end of the day, how well are the enterprises being served? Do we know the issues that they face? Do they know who to talk to? What are when they surface that they tell us that they have, what are the critical considerations? Is it news to us, or actually it is not news to us and we have different programs reaching out to them? This is more a qualitative perspective. So what happened in COVID last year was really that as we have to reach out to the business community and try to help them to overcome the different crises, it's really a test of our familiarity, a test of our understanding, and a test of our reach to the wider business community. And when we look at how COVID has impacted each industry and each enterprises, and whether the government needs to come up with new measures to help them, it's also a test of whether do we as Enterprise Singapore understand them. And this is really, to us, is the ultimate measure. When there's a crisis, can we respond fast enough to reach out to the companies directly? And do the company knows who to look for, or they are confused in terms of who should they turn to in times of needs and in times of crisis? So really, three ways we measure our success. One is what we report annually in terms of number of companies that we have helped. Second is really we look at it 2-3 years down the line, whether the companies that we help actually translated into economic outcomes. And thirdly is more qualitative and subjective in nature. Really, does the company knows who we are? They know who to call, and do we know who they are, and do we know how their needs are, what their needs are? So I think this is these three aspects that we will measure our success. Yeah.
And do you also have a target level for these, and how do you fare against your own expectations on that?
Well, we set targets in terms of the number of, or rather, we don't set targets. We look at, we measure how many companies do we help on the annual basis based on our understanding of the work in progress and the companies that we have spoken to. And so far, we have always exceeded what our estimates will be since the day that we were formed in 2018. But our sense is really because as more and more SMEs know who we are and what we can do, they will approach us more readily. So therefore, exceeding our internal projected numbers is not something that we would greatly celebrate, but it does shows the volume of work that we have been working on. Now, in terms of the actual impact on outcomes to the economy, I think it's a varying degree of performance. For some sectors, I think we are doing pretty well. The contribution has gone up. For some sectors, actually has been quite muted, right? Especially those who are catering to domestic demands. But again, I think that's probably in the context of whether the economy has been expanding or not, or whether there are curbs in terms of expenditure. So far, I think we have done better over the years, but there are still a lot of room that we need to improve in terms of how we can support the companies more effectively. Whether are we able to reach out to as many sectors as possible? Are there underserved companies, underserved sectors that we need to look at? And of course, from time to time, many SMEs and the trade associations will WhatsApp me directly, because if they encounter situations on the ground that perhaps our policy, what we do on the ground may not necessarily be completely aligned to the policy intent. And that's an internal issue that we need to deal with. But when I look at it, I think I would say that I'm satisfied that year on year, we are doing slightly better than the year before and doing more than the year before, but I don't think we are there yet. Yeah.
Well, that's a very good position to be in, to improve overall. And actually, one of the questions that Joalin Lim has is actually related to exactly your KPIs. Do companies know how to reach you, and how do you actually meet their demands? And he's saying he's a healthcare startup, and would like to keep in touch with your organization to tap into the programs that you're having, and asking who in the organization should I reach out to? And I think that's a typical question, right? Because I think many of the larger companies, they know you, they know ESG, they are established and so on, right? But maybe the companies who need ESG's help the most are the ones who might struggle with exactly this question where Joellen Lim has. So what would be your thoughts on that?
You're absolutely right. I think there are still quite a fair number of companies, whether startups or SMEs, even entrepreneurs, who always wonder who can they talk to in government, and if it's ESG, who can they talk to in ESG, and what are the programs that are available that they can tap on. And I think we still need to continue to reach out to the trade associations, so that the trade associations can then broadcast and organize awareness information sessions with their members. Hopefully through word of mouth, they will know who to call. Similarly, we do have a network of SME centers. There's 11 SME centers. Actually, we are setting up a 12 in Chinatown, I believe. 11 SME centers spread around the whole island with business advisors, where SMEs can go to find out more information on what are the services available, what are the programs available, and even just simple business advice on how do they run or grow their business. So we do have that as well in Singapore. So the challenge really, actually, my sense is that the SMEs themselves will have to take the initiative to find out how to contact these centers and even to contact ESG directly. We have a hotline, we have a phone call, and so forth. Now, I think what is probably a slight, misnomer is that they think that ESG's role is just to give grants. And the most important thing that ESG can do, and the most beneficial thing that ESG can do, is to give grants to help defray business costs. I think this is really not the case. Although giving grants is one of our key service that we offer, our grants are tied to capability upgrading. It's not meant to subsidize what is day-to-day business cost. So we still have companies telling us that I'm going to buy a crane, I'm going to buy a forklift. Can they apply for a grant to defray part of the cost of the crane or the forklift? And our answer usually is no. And then they will say they will be disappointed. But grant support is just one of the things that we do. And actually, when we look back and look at what we have done so far and getting feedback from companies, that is probably the least effective and things that we can do for companies, because grant support, regardless of the amount, is a one-off amount. It may defray the cost for a particular period of time, for a particular purchase, or for a particular activity, but it doesn't increase the top line. It helps to reduce the bottom line somewhat, reduce the cost somewhat. The two other things that we do are more meaningful to SMEs, and that's what SME will tell us. One is really about identifying the opportunities, identifying the partners and the networks, and linking the company to these partners, to these opportunities, and to these networks. And this is often a lot more effective, a lot more meaningful to SMEs, because by themselves, their networks will be quite limited. The resources that they have will be quite limited, and linking to partners who can help them. It could be business partners, it could be universities, it could be center of innovations, it could be mentors, it could be chambers, both local as well as foreign chambers. I think all these are a lot more useful for them because it will help them to tap onto expertise, tap onto advice, link to opportunities, open doors, and it's a lot more long-lasting in that sense. So this is one area that we spend a lot of time doing, but often it's not measurable in that context. And SMEs who have tapped on that actually tell us that they would rather do that than to apply for whatever incentive that we have. The second thing that we do that's actually more meaningful, and we are beginning to do a lot more now, is to put together meaningful programs that can help upgrade capabilities, or that can train the SMEs leadership, or that can point them to a certain direction, whether it's immersing into a new markets. The scale-up program and the enterprise leadership for transformation program is a good example. We bring together the likes of Ernst & Young, McKinsey, PwC, and the leading business school to say, can you roll out a new program that will equip the SMEs leaders so that they are able to drive their companies forward and connect them to the global network that these partners will have. The cost is not low, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars that the SME they have to pay, but they never once grumble about the cost. Because they value the network and the competencies that this player comes in. So the curation of those programs important is becoming more meaningful. Similarly, in terms of the Global Innovation Alliance, we work with GIA partners to bring groups of startups to, say, Berlin, to Shenzhen, to Shanghai, to Bangkok, so that they will go in, plug into the startup community, understand the markets, connect to potential partners. I think those are a lot more meaningful than the subsidy towards the cost of doing so. So we are beginning to do more in this aspect, really to not just administer incentive, but to connect companies to opportunities and partners, and also to curate more meaningful programs for the businesses themselves.
That's really leveling up. I mean, giving a grant is, of course, in a way simple, but it doesn't have the effect. But the competence upskilling and then these networking things that you're talking about, of course, brings the real value. But I think it's very clear then for Joanna Lim, you have these centers they can contact, and they also have the contacts on the website and to contact you, right, to join in with that. So I think that's very clear.
My name card will have my email and my phone number, so you can spread around and people can WhatsApp me. And I know there are people who contacted me through LinkedIn, and I have to ask them to send me an email so that I can link them to the right colleagues to follow up. So I think we can continue to do that. Yeah,
that's very, very honorable of you to be so approachable, even as the CEO of ESG. I think we appreciate that very much in the community. Thank you. So around that, actually, about helping companies. So one way is then, as Joanna Lim here, Joalin Lim, that he contacts you. But is that the only way, or do you also, how do you decide which companies to help? Because your resources are limited, and who do you actually reach out to proactively, or how does that actually work? How do you decide where to focus your energy?
Well, I think we adopt two approaches. One approach is a proactive approach to reach out. The other approach is really to be reactive, and when people come to us. Now, for the first approach, internally we organize ourselves in terms of markets and in terms of industry clusters. So our colleagues in specific industries, their responsibility is to see how to transform and help the companies in that particular industry. So they will need to know how the industry looks like, who are the players, and they must have a plan to reach out to the players one by one over time and see how can we help them. And of course, in that process, some will be more willing, more able to come forward to say, I would like to grow my business. How can we work together? But there will be others that say, well, I'm not ready yet. I may have to focus on other things, so don't bother me at this point in time. Then we will KIV them, and then we will check back in with them maybe a year later or 6 months later. But every single industry teams in ESG will have to do that. Some are able to do so faster because the industries are smaller. For example, in the whole air freight sector, there's less than 200 companies. So it's a lot easier for us to reach out to each of these companies one by one and cover all of them over a couple of years. But there are other industries that's actually very numerous. Again, the wholesale trade sector, 30 over 1,000 companies. The F&B sector, 20 over 1,000 companies. It will take a while for us to try to reach out to all of them. one by one and so forth. So it is a proactive approach to try to engage those players, starting with those who are bigger and therefore employ more people and have a more substantive impact on the economy and on employment, and they have the potential to do even more. So we'll start with that before as we cascade down to the smaller companies. And then we will also then work with the trade associations to reach out to other companies in a sense. So that's one approach, which is a more proactive approach. The second approach is a reactive approach. And this is where enterprises will call us directly or are referred to us by our partners. And we will endeavor to help them and not turn them away. Sometimes it's easier said than done. Sometimes we do end up turning some of them away unknowingly, but we will try to see what we can do to help. Not all the times we are able to accede to their requests, because as I mentioned earlier, some may just want us to give them a grant to defray a certain purchases, or some may, especially last year, may have approached the bank and were turned down by the bank for a loan, despite the fact that the government is taking up 90% of the risk. So for this kind of situation, we will see what can we do to help. It could be that maybe we can't give a grant to this company, but we may be able to point to someone or another agencies who are able to do so. For loans, it could be that maybe we'll try to understand, perhaps it's because the company have already defaulted on certain their previous loans. So the solution is not to get another loan, but to restructure the loans. Or it could well be that the company may have only approached one lender, and we will link them to others as well, so that they have a second or third or fourth options altogether. So we will try to see what we can do. And some is really, they just need some advice, so we will just point them to the SME centers. So in a sense, we try on the first approach, proactively, we will look at those who are more ready, who has aspiration, who have the ambition, then we will render more resources to work with them. But actually, even for those who are not ready, so long as they call us, we try to see what we can do. And if we can't do so, we will try to bring in other partners who may be able to talk to them and help them. So we try to do that. Our partners are very important because we have limited resources. The whole ESG numbers about 1,000 people handling that 4 or 5 different roles that we play. So we have to leverage a lot on our partners, be it the SME centers in the TACs, be it the banks, be it the business partners like EY, PwC, and so forth, the universities, the research institutes. So we have to leverage a lot on the partners to do much of the heavy lifting for us.
Yeah, I fully understand the complexity in that. So we have some questions about SMEs here, and you have really, I mean, your whole career, you have been engaging with the SME community. So like, how would you describe the SME community today? And what are the strengths and weaknesses of the SME community, and has it evolved over time? And what do we need to change? So basically around, how do you see the SME community?
Well, when you look at SMEs, my sense is everybody has an opinion on the state of play in the SMEs, because each one of us will come into contact with them in different settings, whether it is in the retail mall or in the industrial estates and so forth. And they are often our service provider, whether at work or even in our personal life. And therefore, my sense is that we tend to be overly critical of the state of play among our SMEs. And we tend to, in some ways, focus a lot more on the weakness or the weaknesses than the strength. Yeah. Clearly, I think the weaknesses are still about whether the SME leadership has that ambition, has the ability to grow the business, whether the leadership team are good people managers, whether SMEs themselves are good employees or employers, whether the SME has the capability, whether is it productive, whether it's innovative and so forth, whether the SME are able to grow internationally. So these are often the weakness. SMEs also tend to be weaker in terms of availability of financial resources. So often these are the issues, and when we see them in whether in the industrial estates or in our neighborhoods, some do appear to be quite dated in terms of their operating processes, their working environment, and so forth. And that sort of forms our perspective of SME by and large. But that said, I will say that actually we are doing them and doing ourselves a disservice. The reason why we are able to see that is Singapore is very small, so we do come across SMEs in all shapes and sizes within the 24-hour period. When we look at our SMEs and how we compare to overseas, and often when we look at overseas SMEs, we tend to see the best of the breed overseas, and then we compare the average here versus the best of the breed overseas. And certainly it's never the right comparison. And that again put our SME down. But if you take a hard look and see how our SMEs has been doing in their respective areas, and you start to appreciate the strength. First and foremost, I think our SMEs and our business leaders are very much recognized and sought after by multinational companies because they appreciate the way the SMEs do business, is emphasis on quality, is reliability, is trust. Maybe a little bit more can be done in terms of innovativeness, but really the SMEs are dependable and reliable. And that's why many global companies want to work with them. Even the companies in the region will want to work with them because they will rather trust our SMEs as suppliers, as partners, than sometimes to trust their own kind because they know how business practices are like. So we do have very several strengths in that aspect that we tend to appreciate. When we look at, the second aspect that we look at is really that, our SMEs internationalizing sufficiently. The unfortunate thing is that we tend to compare with the global brands. But if you have, and many of the participants, if you have stepped into Shanghai, Beijing, and some of the major cities in China, if you go into Hanoi, in Ho Chi Minh, you go into Jakarta, you go into KL, many of the Asian cities, and you look at some of the bigger shopping malls, especially the malls who are catering to the middle or upper middle class audience, and you start to count the number of Singapore brands in those malls, and then compare with the number of US brands, European brands, Japanese brands, and so forth. I think the numbers we were not in any way smaller in terms of numbers compared to the other countries. We probably rank number 2 or number 3 in terms of numbers. But then if you look at the size of those brands vis-a-vis the competitor brands like the Starbucks, actually our SMEs are much, much smaller compared to the competitors. But the fact that our SMEs has been able to internationalize and actually compete at that stage bodes very well for the companies. So I would say that when it comes to global business, I think our SMEs have as a collective has actually punched above their weights, but we have not really given them the recognition and the appreciation in doing so. And we tend to be very much overwhelmed by the weaknesses that we see on the day-to-day basis. So I think really taking a step back and looking at it, we will have to do a right comparison and give credits where it's due, and then continue to support these SMEs rather than having the mindset and notions that maybe our SMEs are never as good as their counterparts overseas. So really, the long and short of it is really that our SMEs are growing. They do have a strength that their partners overseas recognize them for. They have punched above their weight in the international markets. Many are branching out quite successfully as well. But of course, there are significant weakness too, given the size is much harder to do so. there are still many laggards that we need to upgrade, and we need to do a lot more in terms of innovation as they are differentiating value proposition rather than a me too kind of strategy. So a lot more needs to be done to upgrade many of our SMEs. But other than that, I think over the years, we have done quite well globally.
Definitely, fully agree on that. And we also use one term, SME, for something that is definitely not a homogeneous concept. It's very diverse, and you're right, we're a very small country here. But do you have any, on that, do you have any like favorite company where you can say this SME was a part of the ESG journey and ESG played a role, and now that company has actually been able to achieve what we want more SMEs to do? Do you have like a role model?
Well, actually I wouldn't say that we have played a significant role. The most recent one was PetSnap. I think the papers reported that they have raised a new round of financing, a $300 million round that put them into the unicorn status. And I think in the last few weeks, the mainstream media has reported on them. I would say that this is an example of how not just ESG, but different agencies came together and supported the company over the history of the growth history of this company. It started when the founder was a student in NUS, participated in the NUS Overseas College program, where he spent a year, I think in Silicon Valley or in the US, working for startup while doing his programs. And then he got bitten by the entrepreneurship bug. So when he came back, he decided to set up his own business. And when he set up his own startup, it was incubated by NUS Enterprise, mentoring him and his co-founder and to form that company. At that point, I believe NUS Enterprise provided a startup grant. Spring at that point also provided a startup grant, $50,000 just to get it started. So this was how we started. I think that was in 2005 or 2006. Over time, he has tapped onto different programs, both in terms of developing the technology, commercializing the technology. EDB came in, and then we helped them to set up a presence in Suzhou. As they grow bigger, other government agency came in. EDB came in to help them build up R&D team in Singapore. So it was really a multi-agency kind of help that will grow them, and finally they become who they are today. But it takes a village to raise a child. So here we took many villages to really help groom a company. Another one that we were very proud of, I would say that we didn't play much of a role. A large part of it is really the entrepreneur's mindset and drive. It's Charles & Keith. It was a very small shop. We supported them in their various capability upgrading. We also helped them have access to JTC's factory space. And then we helped them to link up to franchise partners, potential malls overseas, including those in China. And now it is a global brand to the extent that there's a lot of copycats around, particularly in China. So we have done very well, quietly on its own. But these are those that we are very proud of, and we certainly would like more companies to be able to do so.
Yeah, super interesting to hear those success stories. It's really inspirational. And one of the areas you mentioned at ESG is helping companies is in competence. And Vincent Ho, he has here a question regarding culture, because on top of strategy, systems, and so on, all those things that are more hands-on and skills, what about culture? So he says there that in many organizations, there is a real or perceived fear to enable and encourage people at all levels to speak up and try new things and being entrepreneurial and at the same time to hold each other accountable. And these are critical factors, right? Innovation and all that. So I guess it's in his follow-up question, he clarifies a little bit also, if you're helping whilst upgrading leadership skills are important, are there programs where ESG is involved to enable leadership teams as a whole to come together, to acknowledge and take stock of the fears and aspirations?
Yes, you're right. The whole culture, the whole mindset is of utmost importance, and it has to start at the top. So that's why the no amount of upgrading of specific capability and processes will be effective if it is not led at the top and sustained over a period of time. So, and therefore, training the leadership, opening up their minds, getting them to realize that culture is important, getting them to realize that human capital is important, getting them to realize that they have to bring in the right people and let the people that they brought in to drive the business rather than having to control it so tightly. All these are important, and that's why the Scale Up programs, the Enterprise Leadership or Transformation Program, aims to really open up the minds of these entrepreneurs. Both programs actually allows them to bring in the C-1. So it's not just a CEO. Some will bring in the COO or a few other executives in the C-suites. And many actually took the opportunity to bring in their children who are the second generation, because they are also in the process of handing the reign of the company to the second generation. And these second generations are very much well trained. They have their global networks, their school, not just in Singapore, but in reputable universities overseas. They don't have that kind of concerns and constraint that their parents have. They are a lot more willing to tap onto the global network, leverage on partners, people with the expertise and skills, and more open for new ideas. So we are seeing many of the second generation coming into the business. And I think that bodes well for many of these businesses because it brings in the different culture, a different level of risk-taking, a more open approach, greater affinity for partnership. And I think that is good. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's no doubt that the fantastic Singapore success to a big part is built on the strong cultural foundation we have here. You hear sometimes, though, that as the country evolves and as technology and society at large evolves, so does the culture. So how you talked about the second level people coming into companies. How do you see the culture changing from the hardworking Merdeka generation and into the younger generation? I think the older generation, we always like to think it was better before, right? But how do you see this new generation coming along and the culture and what does that mean for SMEs and entrepreneurships?
Well, I think for companies where you have the second generation coming in, you start to see the culture change, but it can't be an abrupt change because they have to recognize that the parents and the older generations have different stakeholders. And the key is how do you satisfy the stakeholders and then give the stakeholders the confidence that the new generations have what it takes to grow the business. In many SMEs, the first generation of owners, they have benefited from investors who are relatives, friends, and so forth, and who have a share. And that's why the SME founder or CEO can be a little bit more hesitant in taking on new risks or changing the direction of business altogether because he or she has painstakingly grown the business and now it's almost payback time to their shareholders, and they are not going to put their whole family's wealth and their shareholders' wealth at risk in that context without serious and deep considerations. And therefore, they tend to be a lot more resistant to drastic change. At the same time, however, I mean, that's the reason why many of them will want to first go listing, whether it's on SGX or catalyses, because listing is a way for them to monetize the share and give the returns back to the shareholders. After they have listed a few years, they will privatize. And privatization allows them to go back to being a private company, a cleaner shareholding structure that will allow the younger generations, the professional managers to come in to grow the business more aggressively in the different direction. So it's this two-stage process. process that allows that many SMEs are looking at in order to sort of pay back and give the returns back to the original sets of founders and backers, but then clean up the shareholding structure to give the second generation or the new generation and the professional managers that he's going to bring in that freer hand to drive the business forward. So I think it is this kind of direction that we are seeing. It's necessary in order to put the SMEs on a better footing to grow, to move forward. But it is easier said than done because every single family-owned business has its own unique characteristic. And to say that this is the model for everyone is not likely to be possible. So we need to then appreciate the individual unique characteristic of each of these SMEs and see how to work with them rather than to adopt a one-size-fits-all model or to criticize certain SMEs for being too slow because they were not moving fast enough. But we just really need to understand the constraint that they have in order for us to be able to help them move forward.
Yeah, very true. You also mentioned how the government and ESG is helping companies in the crisis, but it's also fair that the crisis, some companies actually have benefited a lot from the crisis, and there's a huge demand in many areas actually, and some companies are even struggling with that big demand. That's the other side of it. And we have two questions from the Singapore International Chamber of Association, Rubber Association, and the first one there touches on that because what we have seen, and we actually had Tan Chong Meng as a guest speaker just before you actually at the last month, and touched on that as well. This has caused a disruption to the supply chain, which is actually hurting businesses, and many are struggling with that. Container shortage and extreme high prices for shipping, and the Rubber Association are not maybe able to, some members are not able to fulfill contracts. And how can ESG work together to resolve or mitigate this, or can ESG?
Well, yeah, when I saw the question, I asked my colleague, what can we do to help? I think the immediate problem in terms of the container disruption, not enough container in certain direction, I think it will be very challenging for ESG or for that matter, the Singapore government to come in to intervene or even to alleviate, because it's really about the imbalance in terms of trade flows today. So unless the government goes in to say that, okay, I'm going to buy more containers and put it one way, but even that doesn't solve the problem because you bring it one direction and then you'll be stuck and you don't go the other direction. So this is a part that will be very difficult to alleviate, and that is my honest answer. Now, moving forward in the medium to longer term, the challenge is really to see how can we stop something like this from happening in the future, and it is therefore about diversifying whether it's a supply chain or diversifying the container routes and spread the eggs into more basket in a sense rather than being heavily dependent on one. I just give an example. Let's say, for example, in our food supply, for a long time and even now, almost a significant proportion of our eggs supply are from Malaysia. The rest, we have some local production. So when the Malaysian imposed the movement control order in March or April last year, we were very concerned that essential supplies will be stopped. And even if it's allowed to carry on, we are concerned that industrial activities or agricultural activity will be stopped in Malaysia that will then cut off the supply of eggs to Singapore. And with more than 80-90% of the eggs coming from Malaysia, that is a very significant impact. So we have to go towards a diversification of the supply. We started importing eggs from Thailand. The problem is when we started importing eggs from Thailand, the Thai realizes it and they stop the export of eggs to Singapore. So that becomes another challenge. And that's why we now have expanded our supply to Poland, to Ukraine, to many other sources, so that no one single source will be able to handicap the whole economy. And I think we are moving forward, we are adopting the same, not just for food, but also for many of our SMEs. We are talking to them to say that, well, let's look at where are you sourcing your components, where are you sourcing your materials, where are your employees from, and then how do you then make sure that none of, and your sources of raw materials, components, and even your talent pool can withstand any significant stoppages. So it's really to reduce concentration risk. Similarly, we are asking them to say that who are you supplying to? Where are your markets? Is diversifying. First step is to diversify away from Singapore as a main market to maybe a Singapore +1. But at the same time, we also don't want to have a situation where they are overly dependent on another foreign markets because something can happen in that market. So they need to go into a second overseas market or a third and a fourth, so that you build resilience in both the supply chain as well as your customer segment. So this is a medium to long-term approach. How can we do that? I think physically it will be difficult for companies to do so, and that's why digitalization will come in. We will work with companies to go onto the digital platform, and that will help overcome some disruption, but not all. But it will also help them to reach out to more markets in a more cost-effective manner, at least at the onset. So digitalization will be a key area that we will want to work with. And I think with the rubber industries, I think we can also see how can we support the industry and the members on some of these more medium to longer term effort to build resilience. But in the short term, with respect to container shortage, I think it will be very hard for ESG and for that matter, the government to do something about it.
Yeah, we fully agree. So in your keynote speech, you mentioned that going forward, we'll see, I think you said, more disruptions, frequent changes, more competition, and we all need to be prepared. And Victor Mills has a question regarding that what can companies do to help them survive and be more prepared for this volatility roller coaster?
Well, my sense is that I don't have a magic bullet. I think really the future is about partnership. If you are a lone ranger doing business, you have your own wholly owned entity overseas, your own wholly owned outlets in certain markets. When you can't travel there, then your business stops. But if you have a network of partners around the whole world, you can still rely on your partners in the market to do business for you. You don't have to be physically there, flying there all the time. Partnership becomes important. Your partners will have a different range of capabilities and products, which means in certain time, if your current solutions and products are not suitable, you can rely on your partners to pivot to new ones. So coming together, working with like-minded partners across the value chain, across different markets, will probably be the way to go. 2 years ago, I was with our DPM Heng in his first visit to Switzerland after he has been appointed as a DPM. We met one of the incubators over there. Interestingly, the mission statement of the incubator was not about growing enterprises. The business mission statement of the incubator was about growing partnerships, because they see partnership as the key determinant on how well a new startups or an entrepreneur can grow its business. So they are there to foster and to grow partnership, not to grow individual enterprises per se. And I firmly believe in that, and that's why moving forward, I think it's important for us to try to continue to encourage companies to work together, both domestically, overseas, within the industry, across the industries, between big and small companies, among smaller companies, among bigger companies. I think this is something that we need to continue to push forward. And if we do that, then it gives businesses whether it's big or small across different industry, a higher chance of overcoming significant crises, and also give businesses the more resources to grow exponentially rather than organically. Yeah.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, so unfortunately, I had a long list of questions I wanted to ask you, but we've gotten so many good questions also from the general audience here, so I've not been able to put them forward. And I see there are still a couple here that I haven't taken from the audience either. But time's running out. I know you have to run, and I have another meeting afterwards. I'm sure all the people listening in as well. But before I round off, is there anything you would like to say to the chamber or our members about ESG and how we can help you, or how you can help us, or any advice you would like to give?
Well, I think the chamber has been a very good partner for ESG over the years. And as Victor has mentioned in the introductory remarks, both the chamber and ESG have been working together, particularly really bringing your members who are major international corporations together, and working with them to see how we can help the smaller companies in Singapore. We will want to continue this line of partnership with the chamber, be it at the chamber level, or actually working with the chamber to reach out to your members and having your members to come and work with us or with EDB to see how can we collectively strengthen their ecosystem in Singapore. So it's not just partnership for the sake of partnership, but we are more interested to look at how can we make Singapore a more competitive and a more useful operating environment for an international company in Singapore. So it's no longer just being able to play host, but also to be able to add value or create value for the multinationals in Singapore. I think EDB has been actively doing so over the last few years. We are working closely with EDB along that line. But that said, between EDB and ESG, we may not necessarily have all bases covered. And I think this is something that we want to work closely with the chamber on to reach out to more of our members. Sometimes it's easier for us to work with individual companies directly because the individual companies have its own unique requirements and a unique way of doing things. But sometimes it makes more sense to bring 2 or 3 of your members together and then drive certain collaboration in a particular area, and so that we can then have the critical mass to bring some of the startups and smaller companies together. So I think that's something that we want to work with the chamber, and that's something that we also wanted to leave behind with all the members who have signed up for this particular webinar. We will be happy to work through the chamber, and Victor can let us know, keep in touch with our colleagues to say which members are keen, or you can also come to us directly. We don't have a particular preference one way or the other. But to me, it's more important to have the chamber to bring all this together, because really the chamber plays a very critical role, not just to bring the community together and talk about common issues, but also to catalyze actions and then sustain them over a period of time. I think that's something that the chamber can do, that individual companies will be more challenging to do.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's very true. And let me then round off this time together by extending my true appreciation and the chamber's appreciation to you, Cheong Boon, and to Enterprise Singapore. We really appreciate the support we get from Enterprise Singapore and the government in general. It's truly helpful, and we are, as I said in my introduction, we are really appreciative of doing business in Singapore, and we know because we also do business in other countries, so we know that this support it's not something universal, and it's not something that we should take for granted. So my heartfelt thanks to you, Cheong Boon, for today's dialogue. And before we end, I also like to extend my thanks to all of you who have listened and come in with all your questions on today's event. There are many more exciting dialogues and events coming up in the near future, and I urge you to look on the screen here or visit the Chamber's website, check out the events calendar, and let us know, let the chamber know how we can help. Call us, drop us an email. The Singapore International Chamber of Commerce, we are here to help you. So thank you all once again, and goodbye from all of us at SICC. And again, thank you, Cheong Boon, for today's very interesting.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.